Hello and welcome to Springwatch 2020. First of our second week, and if you were watching last week, you'll know that our mission remains the same. We want to bring you the very best of British wildlife, but also we want to offer you the pure and simple beauty of nature, because so many of us during this lockdown, during this tragedy, have been connecting with nature to improve our mental health. And we're going to be looking at the science of that today. A bit of biophilia, a bit of phytoncides, things that come out of the trees which help us. Also, if you're very lucky and we've got time, Vansopsia. Then we've also got some new nest and Toya Wilcox. How can you possibly resist? But of course, it's not just the Springwatch team and hardened naturalists that have been getting to grips with nature during this spring to improve their mindset. Lots of people have been doing that, and some of them probably for pretty much the first time.
I feel really lucky to live in Wales at this time because I'm absolutely surrounded by nature, and the thing that has really kept me going is the anticipation of the signs of spring and summer.
While finishing late over the last few weeks, I walked into the car park, lightened my heart, keep safe and enjoy the simple things.
Hello, my name's William and I enjoyed going outside seeing the birds making their nests, and I made my own nest.
I come out here and I see everything changing and growing, and that's something that I'm really holding on to.
This spring, taking a slow walk through the woods looking for insects and spiders has been an absolute lifesaver. You're able to witness tiny dramas such as this life and death struggle between a caterpillar and a crab spider, which really puts things into perspective.
I've been looking for different species of slugs with my brother Theo. There's so many to find. And this is a really slimy slug.
I just made friends with a broad-bodied chaser and his laying its eggs.
What's got me through it is spending time in the garden. Not just tending to the garden, but most importantly, making friends with the hedgehogs that come out of there. It's been a real lifesaver.
The birds is what's making me feel great right now. The bird song's amazing, and you can hear them so much more than you normally would. It's really beautiful.
Surely that's got to be the quote of the season, hasn't it? I've just made friends with a broad-bodied chaser. Absolutely superb. And you know, coming out here during the last 8, 10, 11 weeks has really put a smile on my face and a spring in my step. But even more so has been seeing all of these other people doing exactly the same thing. So heartening. And of course, we haven't tapped into everyone. If you've got pictures or any video of you doing the same, we'd love to see them. Send them to us at BBC Springwatch, Twitter, Facebook and Instagram, and we'll try and feature them if we possibly can. Now, what about that young man there trying to make a bird's nest? I used to do that all of 50 years ago. Get all the ingredients, all the leaves, the grass and the twigs, put them on the lawn and then try and make a nest. Well, it was 50 years ago and I still haven't mastered it, and I never will. We'll never be able to make a bird's nest, which I think is one of the reasons why we enjoy sticking our noses into the real thing. And we've been doing that. We've got lots of live cameras on nests down in the Mendip Hills. Here are 9 of them here as a bit of a teaser, and we can go in and take a quick closer look at some. Here are robins. So we've got cameras on a robin's nest down there. Also a chaffinch's nest too, which we'll be taking a look at later in the week. And our jackdaws. Got a pair of young jackdaws in their whole nest. A couple of characters they are, and lots of shenanigans taking place in this nest hole as well, and they might be fledging soon, so keep your eyes on those. You can watch them 24/7 on the BBC Springwatch website and of course on the iPlayer. Now, last weekend was frankly scorchio. It was really hot. In fact, it was the sunniest calendar month in May, according to the Met Office, that we've ever had since records began. And it wasn't just us humans that were feeling a bit hot last weekend. Some of the birds were too. see those birds were struggling a little bit there with their thermoregulation, keeping their body temperature at its optimum level. And what you were watching was a bit of gular fluttering. See that goose? Looked as if it was panting. We call that gular fluttering. And those young robins laying over the side of the nest gaping. It's one of the few ways they've got of actually losing heat when things get really hot. But the heat might have an impact on this animal. Now, this is a clip that's been sent to us by Ryan Brock near Norwich, and it's a mole above ground. You don't very often see moles above ground. The youngsters will come above ground when they get pushed out of their territories at the end of summer, but of course they do make themselves vulnerable to predation, so they try not to. But I think this one is probably on the surface because the ground has been baked so hard that it simply can't burrow through it at all. And it is a little bit vulnerable. In the daytime, buzzards might take them. They're quite distasteful. Not a lot of things like eating voles, but at night, tawny owls and barn owls will definitely have them. Adrian Seymour has sent us this, and this could be heat related too. This is a blackbird feeding a frog to its young in the nest. Now, why isn't it on worms? Well, probably because the lawn where it's foraging is baked hard again. But it's gone to the pond, and we know that they typically will eat tadpoles, but here they've gone for the later stage of metamorphosis. They've gone for the full frog, and the young seem to be enjoying it as well. Juliet Bowman has sent us this clip. Now, this is going back a year to start with. This was the nest last year that she found in a gate post. A tiny slit there where the locking bar goes had been used by blue tits, and they'd moved in. Well, this year she thought, right, I can't be caught out. I've got to lock my gate for lockdown. I'm going to lock the gate to make sure that whatever it needs to be secure is secure. Did it keep the birds out? No, it didn't at all. As you can see, the blue tits had successfully reared their young last year, so they came back for another attempt this year. And they have, at least when she was filming this, been breeding successfully. You can see the youngsters down inside. Surely the safest blue tit nest in the UK. An armoured nest box for those blue tits. But that slit was pretty slim, so we asked Juliet to go out and measure it. So she went back with a tape measure, and look at this. It's 15 millimetres across, 15 millimetres across. Now, normally when we're providing nest boxes for blue tits, we make a hole that's 25 millimetres across, a full centimetre bigger. Look, I got some data here of the blue tit skull measurements. The width of their cranium across between their eyes, if you like, is 14 millimetres. So they really were having to squeeze into that armoured nest box with just a millimetre to spare. Why do they want to go in such a small space? Basically, you keep all of the predators out. Anything that can't squeeze into 15 millimetres can't get in. Plus it's armoured as well. So, as I say, probably one of the best blue tit nests that we've got anywhere in the UK at the moment. Now, during the lockdown, I've been coming out here and undoubtedly improving my state of mind. Just taking a walk every day in green spaces has been making me feel a lot better. There's no doubt about that. There have been downsides, obviously, to being locked down. For many people, they've been quite considerable. But we can find ways of alleviating them. And I'm sure that my colleague up in mid-Wales, Iolo Williams, has rather like me turned to nature to improve his state of mind.
Yeah, you've hit the nail on the head there, Chris. It's what, 10 weeks done now, and it's been difficult. It's been very difficult physically and in particular mentally at times. But I'm really lucky. I live right in the edge of a small village, so I've been able to go wandering along the country lanes, along the hedgerows, through the fields, through the woods, just immersing myself in wildlife. I've been doing a lot of bee watching and butterfly watching and bird watching. But I've also gone back to my childhood in many ways. My mum and my tide, my granddad, taught me how to find birds' nests, and I've thoroughly enjoyed indulging in that this spring. And I think I found more blackbird nests and song thrushes and long-tailed tits and wrens and robins and blackcaps this year than I found since I was 12 years old. And of course, we've been keeping a close eye over the weekend on our nests down in Monmouthshire in southeast Wales, and the long-eared owls have been remarkably vocal over the weekend, uttering noises we've never heard before. And we'll be picking the bones out of that later on in the programme. What an absolutely cracking bird. As ever, we have Gillian joining us from her home county of Cornwall. How are you, Gillian?
Hi, Yolo. Well, yes, I'm in Cornwall, but I've got to tell you, it's been a really strange few days for me. I feel a long, long way away from all those events, tragic events happening in America and our communities here as well. Obviously, communities that I identify with, really care about. And I guess being out here has helped. It's helped me reflect. And also this little pocket of wilderness I also care about, because this is the Cornwall Beaver Project. And last week, we learned about how beavers are able to restore this habitat. So for me, this is a real symbol of hope. And over the weekend, one of our camera traps came up with the goods. This is what we saw. So not just one beaver, but two beavers, looking a little bit like they're in a very slow procession there. So they come out early evening, and these ones were by the dam itself, probably surveying sort of what structural repairs they needed to do to the dam overnight. And it was just absolutely lovely to see them. We've had lots of views of these lovely animals right through the week that we've been here. So let's just get a lie of the land, first of all. The Tresillian River flows right through this enclosure. It's a 5-acre enclosure. And at the bottom, downstream of it, the beavers have dammed up the river, and they've created this beautiful lake, a beaver pond. And this is the perfect habitat for them. And essentially, right in the middle of this beaver pond, just to the right of me there, they have made a lodge. Now, this is where they live. And it's basically a very solid structure. I mean, it's no surprise really that animals that can create a dam that holds back the force of 1 million litres of water are pretty good at building a home as well. So the structure of these is through lots of big branches that create the framework of the dam, and then twigs and mud that are packed in that make this whole lodge, their little home, very waterproof and insulated as well. So that's their beautiful little home. Now, why go through so much trouble to do this? Now, let's take a look at how they actually use these dams. And what they do is they can only access the lodge from underwater. So what they do is it's like a little castle surrounded by a moat, and they duck dive in order to access the lodge because the entrance is actually underwater. So down they go. And then this is the view from inside the lodge. And there you can see beaver pops into view. And that area there is like an entrance hall, a boot room or a wet area. And they come in and they use that area to groom themselves, to dry themselves off. It looks very, very cozy indeed, and have a good old groom and a shake off. So all of this structure, the dams, the beaver pond, the lodge behind me, all of this is simply because beavers need to have somewhere, they like to have somewhere safe where they can raise their young. And I'm sure we can all identify with that. So later in the programme, I'm going to be doing a little tour of inside one of these beaver lodges, and hopefully we'll even have the pitter-patter of tiny beaver feet. So for now, we are going to be widening our geographical spread across the country, and we're going to be joining wonderful presenter, cameraman Gordon Buchanan up in the beautiful Trossachs in Scotland.
I am in a very special part of Scotland. This is the stunning Loch Lomond and Trossachs National Park. It's 720 square miles of quite contrasting landscapes from lowland into highland, and it really is one of the most beautiful parts of the world, and I'll say it's home to a treasure trove of wildlife. In this part of the Trossachs, the landscape's kind of dominated by forests, by mountains, by hidden glens, by lochs, and by one lake. Welcome to the Lake of Menteith. I've got my big boy camera on standby should anything exciting happen. Let's back up a little second. I said Lake of Menteith, I'm in Scotland. Surely it should be the Loch of Menteith. Well, no. Lake of Menteith is famous for being Scotland's only lake. It gets a bit confusing here because there are other lakes in Scotland, but those are artificial, man-made bodies of water. The Lake of Menteith is 100% natural. Just to get a bit of geography, half an hour ago you could see the towering, majestic Ben Lomond there. On the other side of that, there's Loch Lomond. 20.3 miles in that direction is my front door. coming here the other week was the first time that I actually left Glasgow during lockdown, and it was my very first visit to this extraordinary lake, and I have very quickly fallen in love with this place. It is absolutely wonderful. There's just real magic to the lake. The edges are fringed with mixed woodland, so home to things like badgers and foxes, red squirrels. I'm sure there's a pine marten or two in there, but really it's the birds that dominate. And I've been getting up nice and early every single morning and filming, just watching the world go by. I managed to spot my very first goosander with chicks, and these swans, which are still kind of hanging around behind me, just looked absolutely majestic in that morning light. So the Lake of Menteith is got this huge numbers of wild animals on it, around it, but it's most famous, I think, amongst the angling community. It is reckoned to be one of the best fishing spots in the whole country. So I shouldn't be that surprised that it's also become a hotspot for what has fast become my favourite bird of prey, the osprey. So the ospreys are doing remarkably well here. Just in this immediate vicinity, there are 8 nesting pairs, and I would say that the lake is visited pretty much by any other osprey within a 20-mile radius of this area. And when you consider that osprey numbers in the UK are still lower than golden eagle numbers, it just makes this place an extraordinarily beautiful and special place. So osprey numbers this year, it's actually been quite a kind of poor record for them returning from Africa. Early in April, we were enjoying that high pressure and sort of beautiful sunny weather. But in southern France, in Spain, there were these really powerful easterly winds. So for these migratory birds like osprey and other birds, they were being pushed out into the Bay of Biscay, and inevitably some of those birds got lost. Some of them may have died at sea. Others might just have got delayed and missed that sort of critical time period to get back here to breed. But for those birds that have returned to the Trossachs, they seem to be doing remarkably well. This really is the perfect place for them. I'll talk a little. It's really the number of lochs that are in the Trossachs that makes this such a great place for osprey. And I think the Lake of Menteith probably has more food than any. There's brown trout, there's roach, there's pike, and I was told earlier on that the local fishery every week releases up to 1,000 rainbow trout into the lake. They release those trout for the anglers, not necessarily for the osprey, but the local fishery are more than happy to see the osprey community benefit from that handout. So it's fair to say that this place right here is the ideal place for an osprey to set up home. There are fish on tap. Of course, osprey are experts at catching fish. They're perfectly designed to do that. What I've seen here generally are birds patrolling maybe about 300 feet. Round about 100 feet, they can spot a fish, and they've been doing these stoops. So all that grace and elegance as they stoop down kind of sort of vanishes as soon as they hit the water. As I said, they're specially adapted. They've got special adaptation in their eyes. The lens comes over when they hit the water. Their nostrils close when they go underwater. And their talons are kind of unlike that of most other birds of prey. They're like a fisherman's hooks. Since I've been here, I've been keeping a close eye on a particular pair of osprey. For me, their nest is about a 5-minute walk. For them, it's about maybe 4 or 5 beats of their wing. This hulk of a nest is really beautiful. It's been built slap bang in the middle of a farmer's field. We know a fair bit about this pair. They built this nest back in 4 years ago, and the female she was born in 2012, as was the male. What is remarkable about this nest, it's really well constructed, so it's supported by those limbs of the oak. It has been there for 4 years. Just think of all the winter storms that we've had in that time, and that nest has endured, just with 1 or 2 minor refurbishments. At the moment, I've been watching the female. She's been working hard brooding those eggs. The male has been working equally hard, maybe a little bit more, catching fish. He does all the fishing at the moment. The other night, he was gone for maybe 3 hours, and then he flew in with this tiddler. It was possibly the smallest fish that I'd ever seen an osprey bring back to a nest. And the female kind of turned her nose up at it, but the very next morning, he flew in with an absolute whopper, possibly the biggest fish that I've ever seen an osprey catch. Over the next couple of days, I'll be keeping an even closer eye on those ospreys, on their nest, because with my enormous big lens, I hope to bring you footage of tiny little osprey chicks. We're going to go back to Chris, but Chris, I was thinking, those very birds could have flown over your house about a month and a half ago.
I have got osprey, Gordon, on my garden list. I live quite close to the Solent and they will use that as a migration route north. And one Sunday afternoon I looked up and did spot an osprey flying over. And if you're close to any rivers, actually, always worth looking in springtime to see if an osprey is passing over. Of course, Gordon mentioned there that there are still more golden eagles than ospreys. That might change in the near future. Just about 35 miles away from where I am now, the Roy Dennis Wildlife Foundation and Birds of Poole Harbour have been reintroducing ospreys. They laid eggs for the first time in 200 years this year, so fingers crossed we'll have ospreys in the south of England soon too. But what about the nest that we're watching? We've got a whole load of cameras on nest. Here are 9 of them that we've got at the moment. These are in the Mendip Hills, so not close to the New Forest where I am. As you know, we've had to split up all of our resources this year. There they all are. I'll tell you what, let's have a look at the middle one. Let's go through the middle window because that's a new nest for us. We can go live to our reed warbler's nest. And there you can see this lovely little nest is supported in the reeds. Now it looks a little bit skewy-whiff. I can assure you that it probably started level, and the reason that it's grown like that is because the reeds that it's attached to have grown at different speeds. So if you've got a fast-growing reed on one side and slow on the other, it gradually tips the nest up. But as you can see, no problems to date. It's got 4 youngsters inside and they're all being safely looked after by the adults. We've been watching it, obviously, detailed observations throughout the course of the days that we've had the cameras on that. Bit of wind, not giving it any problems. The cup is quite deep, I have to say. And there you can see those little youngsters. About 130,000 pairs of these birds, and they've come all the way back from sub-Saharan Africa, Central Africa, Southern Africa. They make that incredible journey back here to feed their young on a diet of insects, spiders, and even a few snails that they find up in amongst those reeds. About 55% of the nests are successful, and about 24% of them fail. And the principal reason for failure is small mammal predation. So despite the fact that they're supported in the reeds over water, small mammals still tend to get to them. Let's take a look at our live camera now, a camera which gives us a view of this environment, and you can see it's pretty wet there. So what sort of predators might be getting out? Well, at night we've seen this, not a small mammal predator, but a potentially much bigger mammal predator. Paddling through the water, none other than a fox. I never seem to think of them as sort of paddling animals or swimming animals, but of course they are. They were a remarkable generalist, as it were, and they would easily be able to swim through here if they thought it was worthwhile, and it might be worthwhile with all of the nests that are out there, because it's not just the reed warblers that are out there, there are other species too. One other nest that we've been looking at are our blue tits. We've been following this one really closely. It's slightly unusual. There is only one parent, the female. Now what's interesting is that in one study, 86% of the nests that failed because one of the adults disappeared. So that sounds like bad news. The good news is that 71% of those nests that were being serviced by a single adult produced at least one young to fledging. So these birds have the capacity to adapt if one of their mates disappeared. Now the females do a better job of rearing young on their own, probably because they are the ones that brood them. And if the adult male disappears when the young are small, then they would probably get too cold if she wasn't there to brood them. But she's been feeding them, and the other thing they do is they up their feeding rate if the other bird disappears, quite considerably, 6 times more. They can go out and forage for food. Let's go live to see how they're getting on, and they are still there, the 3 youngsters. They're looking pretty good, I've got to say. Look at that. A few more days and they might fledge, and all all of her extraordinary hard work will definitely be paying off. It'd be great to see those getting out and fledging out of that nest. Fantastic stuff. Another of those species that are out in the water are our coots. We've been watching the coots. Here we can go live to them now. A pair of coots have made this somewhat scrappy nest. It's on the edge of the water, and there were 8 eggs in the nest, and they've been diligently incubating them there. No sign of the youngsters, and I can tell you there are youngsters because on Saturday those eggs started to hatch. And look there, you can see one of the little youngsters, and just beyond it, that egg with a little tiny hole in where one of its siblings is starting the process of emerging. But look, I like this. One of the birds passes some food over. It looks like a beetle larvae, maybe caddisfly larvae or something. Very delicately it's being put in of those chicks. They started hatching on Saturday, like I say. 5 of them have now hatched. Some of them, the bigger and the bolder, that hatched first, have started to make their way out of the nest and have been paddling around. And what's interesting is that the female, again, can do most of the brooding here. And then the male, when they start to come close to hatching, will build platforms out in the vegetation where he will take those that leave the nest first, and then they can climb up on the platform and they can be looked after. But I'm now going to tell you something which I think is really remarkable. Results of a new piece of scientific work have told us that the later eggs that hatch produce more colourful chicks. So you can see they've got this wonderful orange and red coloration on their head. Well, the ones that hatch last are much brighter in colour. How can that possibly happen, and what's the point of it? Well, the female chooses. When she's laying her eggs, she puts more pigment into the last eggs that she lays. So when they hatch, the first ones leave the nest, they get plenty of food. Both parents are looking after them, feeding them a lot. Obviously those in the egg aren't growing very quickly. So when they hatch, they're a bit behind. They hatch, asynchronously, not all at the same time. But those ones have got brighter heads, so they're easier for the parents to identify. And what they choose is a favourite chick, one of the ones with the brighter heads when they've all got out onto the water. And they preferentially feed those with the brighter heads because they're smaller and need more care than those that hatched earlier. What about that? Absolutely fantastic. And I was looking at those coots earlier and they reminded me of Toyah Willcox. I've been playing some of my old punk records recently. The priestess of punk, Toyah Willcox, very beautiful woman, 1981, modelling her looks there, I would dare say, upon a coot. Not unusual because in 1981 I was modelling my looks on a bedraggled canary that had been pulled out of a Hoover bag, I think. Yolo, over there in Wales, in the 1980s, what ornithological inspiration was inspiring your haircut?
Well, in the 1980s, I'm not sure, Chris. Now, it would have to be a coot. Bald as a coot, mate. Bald as a coot. Never mind, never mind. Now, as you know, we've been keeping an eye on several fabulous nests here in Wales, down in Monmouthshire. And one of these is a scarce bird, very elusive bird, and jointly Britain's smallest bird. It's the firecrest. We really didn't know how many eggs were in that nest because we simply couldn't look in. But on Saturday morning, the bird's behaviour began to change. Have a look at this. When they arrived at the nest, they began to flutter, they began to look and stare into the cup, and we suspected that maybe some of those eggs were beginning to hatch. Both adults were in attendance every now and again, just having a look, not really sitting, just staring, looking a little bit bemused, wondering what's going on. A few pecks there as well, flying away, and soon they were bringing in food, bringing in invertebrates in their beak. So we had confirmation that finally those eggs had hatched. Still, we can't look into that nest, of course, so we don't know how many of the eggs have hatched. We don't know how many chicks are in there. And it's difficult to tell them apart sometimes, male and female, but the female is on the left with that golden crown. The male has got that beautiful flame orange head on the right. Hence the name, of course, Firecrest. Now, this nest is 6 metres up, hanging under a branch there, and what a beautiful nest that is. Do you see a nestling down there? All you can see when she's down there is just the tip of a beak and the tip of her tail. Fantastic little nest. Last week, we told you about 2 waders we had breeding along the River Usk in South Wales. Now, many of you won't know the River Usk. I think it's Wales's most beautiful river. It rises in the Brecon Beacons, it flows eastwards towards the English border till it hits the town of Abergavenny, then it bends south and it empties out into the Bristol Channel near Newport. It's a very rich place, full of invertebrates, fish and birds, mute swans, mallards there, pied wagtails, and of course our waders, common sandpiper, we'll be looking at that tomorrow, and our little ringed plovers. Little ringed plovers do very well on this river. They nest on shingle banks, I guess, and that's interesting because in England, they're doing remarkably well since they first nested there in 1938. But they tend to nest in old gravel pits, on the edges of reservoirs. In Wales, it tends to be on shingle beds. And we've been following one particular pair here. If we go and have a look and see what happened on Sunday morning. They were incubating 4 eggs. I'd asked them, please don't hatch yet. Not quite ready for you, but they obviously didn't read the memo. Look at that. A little chick. The first chick hatched at 5 o'clock in the morning on Sunday. The adults in attendance. They're very good parents. See the 3 other eggs there, the other adult. Just keeping a wary eye. A few hours later, second egg hatched. 2 chicks there. And just a few hours after that, the third. See the adults taking those eggshells away, because what they don't want is to draw attention to those youngsters. They don't want any predators coming sniffing around and finding that evidence there. As I said, they are tremendous parents, brooding constantly. There she is sitting, well camouflaged. Over the weekend, unfortunately, with an incident with a crow. A carrion crow came down to the shingle here, and immediately one of the parents did this. It's called a distraction display. It's pretending to be injured. See where the nest is, how close the crow is? It's pretending to be injured to draw the crow away from those youngsters. The crow is going to think, there's an easy meal here, I'm going to eat that bird. Of course, it leaves the nest and then flies away because the bird is perfectly healthy. The adults then slowly make their way back onto that nest there, just making sure that those youngsters are still healthy, constantly calling, constantly keeping in touch. And look at that, the youngster finally thinks, I better see, how does my hair look? Well, all I can say is that chick has got more hair than me. Fantastic, isn't that beautiful? 3 chicks out of 4. 2 days later, there they are. And these are precocial chicks, which means that when they hatch, they're pretty independent. They can walk, they can run, they've got good eyesight, and they can feed. I'm looking forward to seeing what happens with those birds then. Now, unfortunately, rain is due tomorrow, and their biggest enemy on these Welsh rivers is often torrential rain. So I hope we haven't got too much rain. And if that is not enough to put a smile on your face, let's go and have a look at our long-eared owls, because over the weekend, they became more and more vocal. Now, this is a view we're quite used to, of course. The mother with the 3 chicks there, and she's preening one of the youngsters. Very carefully, it's part of the bonding process, but listen to the calls. You can hear the squeaky gate call of the youngster, but you've also got that quiet, purring hoot of the mother. Now, we spoke to Chris Sperring of the Hawk and Owl Trust, who's an expert on long-eared owls. He said this is partly a contact call, a bonding call, but it's also a call to encourage the youngsters to eat. It's like your mother telling you, come on boy, eat up, otherwise you'll never grow up to be big and strong. Now, the other thing we found over the weekend is that the female, the mother, is spending quite a bit of time away from that nest, leaving the chicks fairly vulnerable, fairly exposed there, but she's not too far away. She's always nearby on an adjacent tree in a branch there, and if there's any danger, she'll pile straight in. And there is danger too, because we know that we've got nesting tawny owls, nesting goshawks nearby, and both of those are partial to some long-eared owl chicks. Sometimes, you know, I think the female just wants a little bit of me time. She just wants to get away for a while. And I know how she feels. In lockdown, I've been at home with my wonderful wife and 2 boys. Well, they're grown men now. And every now and again, I have to get away as well. And where do I get away? Well, this is where I get away to the countryside and to nature. And Chris now reflects on a group of remarkable men who found solace in nature when they were in extreme lockdown. They were incarcerated nearly 80 years ago in a prisoner of war camp.
That's my song thrush. At the moment, that's the greatest source of solace, that song. That bird's been singing relentlessly for about a week. Those beautiful piping notes and whistles and trills. One of the benefits of lockdown is it's allowing me to read things that I don't have to read. I have to read a lot of the time. But now I'm doing naughty reading. I'm reading things that I don't really have to. It's luxury reading. I've been drawn to books that are about people who can't get out. Albert Camus' A Happy Death. And then Derek Neiman's Birds in a Cage. A remarkable story about 4 prisoners of war incarcerated during the Second World War in Germany. Peter Conder, John Buxton, John Barrett and George Waterson. All passionate ornithologists. And they found respite in the birds that they could see and watch from their prisoner of war camp. I'm going to read a couple of sections for you. There was to be no let-up from intensive bird watching. Spring migration began, and birds that are sedentary in Britain, such as rooks, jackdaws and skylarks, began streaming northeast towards Poland and Russia in huge numbers. Conder captured the excitement of this great passage in his letter home of the 19th of March. On the 3 peak days, over 15,000 birds passed over the camp each day. There must have been a phenomenal yearning to be as free as those birds, to be able to fly home to their families. In 1942, John Buxton told his Swiss ornithologist friend, "I've moved to a new camp now where there are more resident birds than the last. Orioles, black and common redstarts. There has been a green sandpiper once or twice too." Can you imagine? I mean, the Red Cross parcels must have been most welcome, but a green sandpiper? Phenomenal. Conder's notes capture some of the prisoners' incredulity at what they encountered. It seemed as near to paradise as possible in a prison camp. This is probably my favourite bit in the book. One morning, Barrett is out taking a stroll around the yard and he bumps into a German officer, and it turns out that the German officer had graduated from Oxford. He'd fought in the First World War, but then he'd gone back to Oxford and opened a bookshop. And Barrett saw an opportunity here to bring up the fact that they didn't have any books, and the officer expressed sympathy and shrugged. But then this is the crux of it. Sometime afterwards, a guard came into Barrett's hut carrying a brown paper parcel and asked for Barrett. He placed the parcel on the table, promptly swiveled and marched out of the room. Barrett unwrapped the unlabelled package to find the complete 3 volumes of German birds inside. What about that? This enemy had gone out of his way to get something that was to be so treasured by these ornithologists. Humanity brought together by a passion for birds and bird books. It's brilliant, isn't it? Absolutely brilliant. In the aftermath of the war, Peter Conder went on to be the head of the RSPB. George Waterson was responsible for organising the operation that protected the ospreys when they came back to breed in Scotland in the mid-50s. I just wonder now if there aren't people out there locked up in self-isolation who are maybe sharing that passion on social media, that they're finding friends through that medium, friends that they'll keep for a lifetime. And that after self-isolation, they might go on to do great things in the world of ornithology. Perhaps at some stage, someone will write a book, Birds from Self-Isolation. That'd be cool. I'm really confident that that will happen. I think people who have met on social media, have developed a deep fondness for birds and ornithology, will come together afterwards and they'll do great things. And social media has been a great way of meeting people when we've all been locked down. I've met a new brain biochemistry guru, Emma Mitchell. You see, I've known for ages that being out here was making me mentally healthier, but I didn't know why. Emma has explained that to me, and now I'm going to explain to you what she's told me using this model here. So here is a representation of the human brain with its biochemistry all sorted. Now, we have certain neurotransmitters which we need to keep in balance, and one of these here is serotonin. And serotonin is that transmitter which is all about making us positive, making us feel energetic and up for things. Too little of it, we get depressed and we get anxious. But we know that a walk in nature can produce serotonin in our brain. So if I pour my serotonin into the model brain here, you can see that it remains stable and healthy. Another neurotransmitter which is really important is dopamine. And dopamine is the wow chemical. It's that surge of elation you feel when something really brilliant happens. I feel it when I meet my poodles. They feel it too. We know that both human and dog produce dopamine at that moment. But in nature, we produce dopamine when we see something very, very beautiful. So if you're out and about and you spot your favourite bird or a butterfly you've never seen before, you can get a little pulse of dopamine, and then that goes into your brain and you can see that that brain biochemistry is remaining healthy. Now there's another brain chemical, a hormone called cortisol. It's incredibly important. It's the fight or flight hormone. So if you were being chased by a bear in the woods, doesn't happen as often now as it used to, I've got to admit, but a surge of this coming from the adrenal cortex would give you the capacity to run really quick and escape. But if it's constantly produced, it becomes essentially the stress hormone. And at the moment, we've been producing a lot of stress hormones because we've been living in very unusual times that we're not used to living in. And in all sorts of ways, we've been stressed. And the cortisol levels have gone right up. And as a consequence, in our brains, things go wrong. And you can see that the lovely green brain becomes red. What we need is a solution, and what many of us have found is a dose of nature. A dose of nature can reassert the balance between all of these chemicals. So here's the equivalent of a walk in the woods, a bit of a listen to some bird song, maybe kneeling down for the first time in your life to look at a wildflower that you'd stepped over and walked past all of those years. And you can see slowly the brain biochemistry is beginning to work again. It's gone yellow. If we had a bit more time in nature, it should, with a bit of stirring and time, gradually go back to green. Look at that. We're back with a healthy brain. Now that's how the biochemistry works. How does the nature actually influence that? Well, believe it or not, as I'm standing here breathing, phytoncides are coming out of these trees and I'm breathing them in, and they're enhancing my natural immune system. They're enhancing the number of natural killer cells that I have. We are producing those to help our immune system tackle things like tumours and viruses. When I sit on the ground, I'm in contact with bacteria which help the production of serotonin. When I look into the sun and that sun falls on my retinas, again, more serotonin is produced. And as I've already said, when I see a male sparrowhawk dashing through my garden of a morning, a massive surge of dopamine kicks in and my brain is helped. And proof is in the pudding. Look, this has been tested scientifically. So here we've got a graph with bird poo on of a series of people who had high cortisol, and then over a period of time, the blue line shows the natural decay of cortisol, that stress hormone, in their bodies. But look at the group of people that spent time in nature, the red line. the cortisol disappears far more quickly. Nature helps. It doesn't solve all of our mental health problems, but it can help solve some of them. So I suggest that you take a look at Emma's book, The Wild Remedy. It's a remarkable story of her processing all of these things to make herself a healthier person. Lots of top tips in there, I've got to say. Now, very sadly, Michaela Strachan can't be with us for this season, but she has come up with a series of highlights, things that have really tripped her dopamine levels out of control. And one of them, believe it or not, was newts when we were at Sherborne, honestly.
Here in the UK, we have 3 species of newt. Smooth or common newts are the most widespread. They've got spots on their underside and can grow up to 10 centimetres long. Palmate newts are the smallest species and look quite similar to smooth newts, but lack the spots on the throat. The great crested is the largest, up to 50% bigger than the other 2, and is also the rarest, fully protected under UK law.
Newts spend the winter hibernating, but as the weather warms up, then they emerge to start to mate.
I want to discover which species live around the Springwatch HQ, and to do that, I've enlisted some expert help. David Dewsbury has invented a neat little trap which safely catches large numbers of newts, simply made of a plastic box with a slot along one side. Instead of a lid, there's a plastic bag with a float attached and a small hole to let air in.
Yes, that should be
The
good.
box fills with water and sinks to the bottom of the pond where the newts are most likely to stumble into it.
So is that it for this pond, David? Just 3?
Yes, 3 should do it, hopefully.
Now it's off to a second pond.
OK, ready? 1, 2,
3, go!
This one's a lot bigger, so needs more traps, which are best positioned in the deepest parts towards the middle. Newts are most active in the evening, so leaving the traps overnight means we're more likely to catch higher numbers.
So if we catch them, we'll...
The next morning, I'm full of excitement to see what we've got. We start with the smaller of the 2 ponds.
Oh, yes, 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 yes! We've got one! Hooray!
Usually, a female smooth newt has spots under the chin and a much more spotty and bigger spots. This one has hardly any, actually, so it's quite easy. This is definitely a female palmate newt. Something in there.
Oh, look, we've got lots!
Oh, yes.
That's fantastic. Look, how many are there? 6?
Yes, 2 males, 4 females.
Oh, we've got a few again.
Well, quite a lot of palmate.
Oh, my goodness, we've got loads! Oh!
It's a great crested newt, yeah.
Yes! Whoa, look at the size difference.
Yes.
I mean, he looks like a monster in comparison. And you can see that's a male, can't you?
Oh, it is definitely with the white stripe.
Yeah.
And he's got a big crest, but you can't see that. We'll put him in some water and we'll be able to see the crests.
Oh, will the crest come up then?
Come up, yes.
He really is rather handsome with his orange belly and large crest and dark, warty skin. It's completely unmistakable.
One of my childhood memories was when I was 9 going on 10, seeing my very first male great-crested newt, and I saw that white stripe disappearing down into the water. And I thought, my God, that must be a dragon or something.
Little did you know, decades later,
Yes,
you'd be
I know.
making a trap to catch them.
Here I am 60 years later, yes.
As well as the great crested, we also found 14 palmate newts. But that's not all. We still have our other pond to check.
There we go.
Straight away, it's looking promising. These are all smooth or common newts.
If we've got our calculations right, that's 57?
57, thereabouts, yeah.
Wow!
This is the kind of newt that people most likely get in their garden pond. And they see that crest, which is quite striking, and they think this is a great crested newt in their pond. But I think you'd agree, having seen that one before, you couldn't really mistake the two side by side, no.
Well, David, I've got to say, I've been really impressed and amazed how many newts that we've caught. And it's all thanks to your trap here, the Dewsbury trap, named after you. And you know what? I looked up to see if there's a collective noun for newts, and there isn't.
No.
So I think we should call it a lunchbox of newts.
Lunchbox of newts, yeah.
That's amazing to see how much life a pond, even a small pond, can sustain. And the picture here is not much different. We're looking at life on a beaver pond. Earlier in the program, we were looking at a beaver lodge where they live right in the middle of this beaver pond over here. And this is where they overwinter. But right next to me, we have got another beaver lodge over here. This is where they have their babies, and it's why I'm keeping my voice down, because we don't want to disturb them. So here at Cornwall Beaver Project, the first beavers were introduced here, Eurasian beavers, in 2017. And within just a year of them being reintroduced, the first kits were born here. These were the first kits to be born in Cornwall for over 400 years, which is around the time that beavers went extinct. Now here we see one of the beavers, the beaver kits. This was filmed by Adrian Langdon in 2018, and then later Nina Constable, filmmaker, filmed the kit out swimming in the water. It's quite extraordinary to see these lovely little creatures out and about. And then again in 2019, 2 more kits were born here. So what about this here? Well, we haven't seen any kits, but we have heard them. So we're going to try and have a little listen in and see if we can hear these kits. I'll just hunt around a bit for the sound. No, they're not active, but we did record earlier, so listen to this. I don't know if you can hear that. Those are the kids calling. Now, beavers have 1 litter every year, between 2 to 4 kids, and it's just such a lovely sound. We then heard this in this next recording. So here we have the kids again, but then you can hear a much deeper one. That is the parent, probably the mum, responding to them. Now, beavers are really social animals. Communication is really, really important to them. So, along with things like hissing and clattering their teeth, which is defensive stuff for family gatherings, they will have these lovely little mews and whines and little squeaks. And it's really the kits that do most of the vocalization, because they're the ones that solicit all the feeding, grooming, and even play. And this all goes on in here. So we've got a little cross-section of a beaver lodge, very cute little beavers there. And you can see that we access this lodge via these underwater tunnels over here. And they have a lower feeding area where they come in, feed obviously, and where they dry themselves off from coming in the water. But then they have an upper area up here. And this is a living area. This is where they will groom and sleep. And this is also where the kits will spend most of their time. So let's take a look inside one of these lodges. This isn't the one here, but this is from a different beaver lodge. And these are the kits, or one of the kits anyway, inside there. And you can see they're born with fully furred. They'll open their eyes quite soon, quite a few days within being born. And they'll suckle for 2 to 3 months, but they will have solids within a week of being born. So the parents and even the older siblings will bring food back to them, some vegetation. So the kids in there are getting large enough to start coming out soon. So hopefully in the coming weeks, we might get some shots live, hopefully, of these very kids as they start to venture outside.
Live beaver kits will be a real treat. When I was taking my walk today, I noticed that the foxgloves were opening, and these reminded me of one of my favourite stories that applies to mental health. Take yourself back to the late 1800s and the artist Van Gogh, who was famed for being, well, mentally unhealthy. We now think he might have been suffering from bipolar. He went into an asylum at the end of his life where he was treated by a homeopathic doctor, Dr. Gachet, and he gave him digitalis, an extract from these. We still use that drug actually. It's a heart muscle relaxant, but in those days it was given to people with mental health issues. The interesting thing is that if you overdose on digitalis, you develop something called xanthopsia, which is where your sensitivity to yellow becomes enhanced. Sunflowers, cornfields, all of those most famous paintings done at the end of his life are rich in yellow. It could well be that foxgloves promoted one of the best artists in the world to produce some of his most extraordinary work when they were trying to treat him for mental health. What about that? But then I did read a journal account today saying it was utter nonsense. Difficult. You know, I'd love to believe a man story like that. I mean, some people say that men landed on the moon. Got to believe that too, haven't you? How about our mindfulness moment now? Sit back, put your tea down, chill out. Mark Payne-Gill has been out at night with an extraordinary camera. So this is darkness, this is moonlight, but the camera records every little bit of detail in that environment. So look and listen to the remarkable work of Mark Payne-Gill out at night. Absolutely sublime. Really took you to that moment, didn't it? You know, if you get up early and go out into that still, chilly morning and just listen to all of those sounds, breathe all of that air, it's bound to do you some good. But sadly, that's all we've got time for today. Tomorrow, I'm going to be explaining why a muffin can tell us something about mollusk memory. Yolo, top that. What have you got tomorrow?
I'll be bringing you even more fabulous birds.
And I'm going to be celebrating the arrival of some really special chicks, the first of their kind to be born in the UK for over 600 years.
And I will still be here on the bonny banks of the Lake of Menteith to bring you more osprey action and tell you some extraordinary facts about the UK's biggest bird of prey.
And remember, you can catch up with all of our live cameras 24/7 on the iPlayer and the BBC Springwatch website page. Also, our social media feeds are active. Hannah Stitful at 9 in the morning. Megs and I are out to lunch at midday. Hannah's back at 5 o'clock. We'd love to see anything that you can send us at BBC Springwatch, Instagram, Facebook and Twitter. And if that's not enough for you, we'll be back at 8 o'clock tomorrow night. Remember, stay safe, stay sane. Good night.
The Open University is inviting you to take part in its brand new citizen science project, OU Pollinator Watch, created to help us discover more about insect pollinators. To find out how to identify a selection of insect pollinators and share your very own observations or photos, visit bbc.co.uk/Springwatch and follow the links to the Open University.